It's my great honor today to be interviewing my good friend, Dr. Mark Goulston. Now, Mark is a husband and a father and a teacher. He's also a psychiatrist. He's the author of 10 books, including Just Listen. He's been a hostage negotiation trainer. Okay, so he trained hostage negotiators, but he also has specialized in suicide prevention. And in 35 years, he's never had a client who has died of suicide. And today, we're going to be reviewing some of the lessons and the wisdom that Mark has learned in his life. And I would recommend to you to just listen. And welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you for having me, Eben. I truly value our friendship and the longevity of it, which I hope will last into the future for a while.
Yeah, yeah. You're going through some really interesting um, experiences right now, which maybe we can get to here as we move into this. But I mean, we'll talk about hostage negotiation and suicide prevention and so forth. But in this conversation, I'm really interested to hear what produces someone like you. Like, where did you come from?
Well, I grew up in a middle class family in a suburb of Boston, Newton, Massachusetts. I had two older brothers, uh, and my dad could be a little bit on the critical side and harsh side,
Mm-hmm.
and he would often be harsher towards one of my older brothers who could kind of take it out on me. But I was never angry at my older brother. I was afraid of him because I just had this sense that he was getting uh, criticized, maybe even a little bit abused by my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I empathized with that, so that
How
I
how
wasn't
old were
angry.
you? How old were you when you empathized with someone that was, being mean to you?
7, 8, maybe.
Wow. At 7 or 8 years old, you could empathize with him and see that it basically wasn't his fault.
Right. Yeah. In fact, what would happen sometimes when my parents were away, we lived in a 2-story house. I would climb up onto the roof by climbing up along the side of the chimney. And in retrospect, I'm thinking that was crazy. I could have fallen off, but I would go up and sit on the roof there and be very quiet so that when he was
Mm.
trying to find me, he couldn't. And I love my brothers. And so this is not to bash him. And I'll tell you, it's not even to bash my father.
Mhm.
Um, And in fact, what I'd like to drop are certain nuggets that I think your viewers and listeners uh, would find really interesting. So, might I drop one now as we
Of
start talking?
course. Of course. Yeah. I want to know what you've learned in your life.
Well, I collect quotes. I've come up with a few good ones myself, uh, but I collect ones, and there's one that knocked all the other quotes off the table. And it's from a woman named Dr. Shani Duperon. And along with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, they founded something called Project Forgive, and it was nominated for a Nobel Prize. It didn't win. And the quote I got from Shani was, "Forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive."
Mm.
Forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive. And when she told me that, I was driving in a car, told me it over the phone, and I pulled over to the side of the road because it just knocked me over. And my dad had been gone for close to 25 years, and I imagined this apology from him, which I never received and never would, because I've always been a little bit wacky. I've always been outside the box. I've always been fairly creative and intuitive. And my dad was, an accountant by training. He was comfortable inside the box. He was comfortable with numbers. He was more comfortable with numbers than emotionally connecting to people. And he was really a hardworking person. And what I realized is, like many people, including me, there was the fear, can I support this family? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I would come up with some wacky idea, he would often say something dismissive like, what does that have to do with anything? Or what makes you think you know anything about anything? And a bunch of other things, which were very dismissive. But when I pulled over to the side of the road, this is the apology I imagined him giving to me, and I believe he would. Mark, remember when I used to say to you when you come up with your wacky ideas, what makes you think you know anything about anything? What does that have to do with anything? I was really talking about myself because I didn't know a lot outside of numbers. I was good with numbers, and it enabled me to kind of support the family. But what you've done with your life, the people you have reached, the lives you have saved, I don't deserve you as my son. And I'm so sorry that I didn't see that or let you know. It was wrong. And so as I'm seated out there, I started to cry, like, because I believe that down deep underneath his worries about being a good provider, he felt all those things. Mm-hmm. And I believe he might be proud of me because, I've done a few decent things in my life. But here's the other thing that was even more startling is I realized that I now owed him an apology. And what I realized is that forgiving someone frees you from anger, but asking forgiveness frees you from shame. So when I accepted his apology, I said, I owe you one. I've used you as an excuse. I've had a chip on my shoulder. I've held a grudge. If someone asked me, anything about my childhood, I could bring up something not particularly complimentary, and you did the best you could. Yeah, you were critical, and could get a little physical with my older brother. But I understand that it was fear. You didn't own a company or anything, so the fear, am I going to lose my job? And I should have known better. I mean, I'm the psychiatrist in the family, and I can't expect my brothers. And I should have known that down deep it was fear that was driving you, and I didn't. I didn't let myself know it. And I am sorry I used you as an excuse and had a chip on my shoulder. And I can finally say 3 things that I'd never been able to say and feel. I miss you. Pretty profound for me. And I'm sharing that with you, by the way, because, and I'll repeat that quote that I came up with is forgiving others can free you from anger, but asking forgiveness can free you from shame. And if you can free yourself from shame, you might be able to forgive yourself, because when we're feeling ashamed, it's often difficult to forgive ourselves because of how messed up we seem, how unaligned with who we would like to think we are. So that might be the biggest takeaway from this, but hopefully we have a few more coming down the pike.
Mark, that was the most succinct and crystal clear and beautiful example of quote unquote reparenting that I think I've ever heard. Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And I wanted to give an anecdote, because one of the things that I also do is I help people to heal from their trauma. And some of you who are watching or listening will recognize this. And one of my challenges is I'm always reinventing the wheel, meaning I will come up with something and people will say, oh, that's just like such and such. Oh, this
Mm-hmm.
university is doing research. And uh, and everything I do is informed by empathy,
Mm-hmm.
by tuning in and not just empathy, but by causing people to feel felt, which is way different than causing them to just feel understood.
Mm.
And so here's an anecdote, because I've been doing this with other people, but I like to practice what I preach. So I didn't just sit back there, with a critical dad and not act out. So, there was a certain angry side of me. I didn't dare show it in my family because, I might get beaten up. And so I did this exercise where I remembered I must have been about 8. And I was going to join some boys to go vandalize a building. And so in the exercise, I see myself at 8 walking along, probably clueless and, the chip on my shoulder. And so I imagine seeing myself walking to the building, and I walk over to him as me, an adult, and he doesn't know who I am. But I'm setting this up to be a healing exercise. And I walk over to him, and I don't want to scare him because, he's a little bit afraid of adults. And I said, hey there, how are you doing? And he looked at me like, fine. I said, hey, can I just walk along with you? I don't care. Do whatever you want. So I started walking, and I said, so you're fine? Yeah, yeah. I don't think you're fine, because I know what's going on in him.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, what do you mean? I said, I don't think you're fine. I have a feeling you're upset. I have a feeling you could be a little bit angry. And then he looks at me and says, what the hell are you? Who the hell are you? And then I looked at him, and this was my first dollop of a little bit of soft compassion. I said, I had a childhood like yours. And so I just thought, I'd hang out with you, and we're talking. And then I said, so what happened? And he didn't want to talk. Most kids don't want to talk, especially, but he starts to open up. And he starts to open up about feeling afraid in his family. He starts to talk about feeling criticized. And as he's talking it up, I'm listening to him totally non-judgmentally and empathically receptive. And so I'm going to put a bookmark here, because I want to slip in more tactics for your viewers and listeners. So after you free your mind by the forgiveness approach, if you want to break through to anyone you're worried about, child, especially with this epidemic of depression, suicide, it's really awful, or to a spouse, here are some tactics you can use to get them to open up. The first one is, if you can get them to have a conversation, notice hyperbole. Awful, terrible, amazing, great. Just notice words like that, and have them finish what they're saying. And so you've opened them up by not shutting them down, and you want to go deeper. And what you then say is, say more about the awful. And they're going to tell you. So say more about the awful that just happened recently, because that's what they're talking about. And they're going to open up. And then you say, while we're talking about this, tell me about the most awful that has happened to you. So you want to ease them into the exercise. And
Mm.
here's an interesting thing. When you can get that person to describe something so clearly that you see it with your eyes, they re-experience it emotionally and they're not alone. So they start to open up about that. And again, you don't shut them down. You keep them talking. Well, tell me more about that. Well, how did that go down? What did you feel when that happened? What'd you do? How did that work out? And you don't want to guilt trip them with it. Well, why didn't you tell me? Don't do that. What you want to do is lead to something where they come and tell you of their own free will. And but what you're going to notice is you're going to notice they start to feel relieved. You may even notice they start to cry with relief. So it's important not to pull the panic button and jump, oh, it'll be okay. No, they're crying with relief because it's coming up and out from the place in them where it had been repressed, suppressed, and acted out on. And then one of the other ways to further open it is to say, when that happened, what was that like for you? And if you're lucky, they'll say what it was. I was scared out of my mind. I was so furious. There's other phrases I like to use to open people up. And one of them is what I call the 5 reallys. And so they may say that. You can say, oh, I can understand that. But what was really going on inside you? Because what you're hoping is to get to a place where they're guarded, they don't tell you anything, but where they lean into you and they say, I think I might be crazy. I think I'm broken. I can't be fixed. And again, you don't jump in. I gave this process a name, surgical empathy, which is what I used with suicidal patients. Because I believe suicidal people form a psychological adhesion to death to take their pain away. It's not an attachment. You can sort of reason with an attachment. An adhesion, you got to go in surgically. And surgical empathy is its pinpoint empathy where they feel felt by you. But to circle back, I got to finish that story, and thank you for tolerating my
I need a couple of more stories from childhood too. A couple of more.
Okay. So but to finish that way of healing trauma. So there I am, and that 8-year-old me is opening up, and they're feeling relief. And they look at me like, well, who are you? And then I say to my 8-year-old self, what if I were to tell you that this is what the next 65 years of your life looks like? What? Yeah. And then I just start laying out. I don't want to bore them, but yeah, you go meet those kids. I know you're going to meet those kids, and you're going to vandalize a building, and and you're going to go through school and feel like an outsider, feel different than everyone. You're going to go to this college. Oh, by the way, you go to medical school and you crater and you drop out twice because you really get depressed, but someone in college saves your life. The dean of students stands up for you to the whole medical school and says, we're giving him a second chance, whereas the school wants to kick you out because they're losing money. And what happens is, because you go through that, and because you allow this person to step in and save your life, You go on and you finish medical school, you become a psychiatrist, you focus on suicide, and nobody kills themselves for 35 years. And then it goes on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, that's a real fairy tale. Why should I believe you? And I said, show me the mole on your right arm. He shows me the mole. I said, nice mole. Maybe you should get it removed, but you never did. And then I show him the mole on my right arm.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it happens because I'm you. And so if you're picturing this, and I go hug him, and he's a little reluctant. And I said, stop clenching. And then I really hug him.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because as I go into the scenario, I feel myself as that 8-year-old, hurt, angry, scared, about to take it out on the world by vandalizing a building. And so we're walking and we're approaching the building, and I see the other boys, and I said, oh, by the way, you can always call on me. I'll be your fantasy friend. You can always call on me because this future is going to happen. And I said, what do you want to do now? He says, well, I want you to go and tell all those boys what you told me because we're all alike. And I said, I can't do that. I'm a figment of your imagination. You go do that. And he looks at me with a smile and he says, I'm just fucking 8. So that's just sort of a little story, and thank you for allowing me the tangent. And
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. What about your mother? What did you learn from her? Or what did you receive from her?
My mother was a wonderful person. And after I went through that exercise, I remember my father was a wonderful person. He was just scared.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But my mother was always trying to, explain away, my dad. Oh, he's tired. He worked long. But we'd always tense up when we'd hear his car coming in the driveway. Mm-hmm. And so she sort of tried to make it right in the best she could. But it was like putting lipstick on a pain. And I'm a little embarrassed, but sometimes my older brother would be chasing after me, and I'd go hide behind her, and he'd ridicule me, because I was scared. Mm-hmm. And she did the best she could. A little bit else about my childhood. I grew up in New England. I'd never really been out of New England. I visited some relatives in New York. And so I start to go to college at the University of Vermont in Burlington, where they just had those shootings. And I catch pneumonia. So, and during Christmas break, my family went down to Florida, and I went along with them. I'd never been to Florida in the winter, and this was one of the coldest winters in Vermont. We had snow into the middle of May. We had snow beyond the end of the year. And that's all I'd known. And, I like playing in the snow, but when I went to Florida, I saw the palm trees, and I said, I'm out of here. So I did this plot. I'm getting out of here. And also I felt kind of sheltered. This was the 60s. And so I didn't tell my parents, if I can get in, I'm going to transfer to UC Berkeley. I'm going to go from overprotected to UC Berkeley in the middle of the anti-Vietnam thing, in the middle of People's Park, in the middle of Make Love Not War, in the middle of the Fillmore and Janis Joplin. And so I apply. I never told them, and I get in. And I remember I came back and they said, "Why didn't you put your stuff in storage?" I said, "Oh, I'm not going back there." They said, "What?" I said, "I'm going to UC Berkeley." What? And then I was a little manipulative because in that year, the Atlantic Monthly said UC Berkeley was the best university in America, above Harvard, above everyone. And so I wanted to play to, I said, "How can you not let me go to the best university in America?" So I was able to maneuver that. And, I had one suitcase, and I remember, flying into San Francisco and then going over to Berkeley, and it it opened my mind. It just blew my mind. And
Well, Mark, we haven't talked about you at Berkeley in the 60s because my parents grew up, in that same time. What was going on there? What really made an impression on you, or what do you remember about that time being there, especially in San Francisco and the summer of love and all that stuff?
well, one thing I remembered is sex.
I've heard of that.
Because I came from I was very shy,
Hmm.
and I came there, and uh,
Hmm.
and it was just, and it was interesting because I came there as a sophomore, and I remember I went into a dormitory, and so much was happening, and I wanted to get out of the dormitory, but I couldn't get out of the contract unless I joined a fraternity. And fraternities and sororities were kind of going through a phase because we're here to protest the war. We're not here to join fraternities and all that sort of
Hmm.
stuff. And so I got into a fraternity, but my plan was to do that so I could get out of the fraternity and go into an apartment. And I made some friends and girlfriend and that sort of thing. And so I can remember, I was a pledge, in the fraternity.
Hmm.
And part there is you go through Hell Week. And so Hell Week is you go through something and then they say, "Welcome, brother." And I guess I had kind of a quirky personality, and the president, the senior, was the big cheese. He was my big brother, and he took a liking to me. And we go through Hell Week, where you're throwing up and they're spitting on you, some of that stuff. And then at the end, we make it through, and he hands me my pearls and he says, "Welcome, brother." And I said, "I just quit." He said, "How can you quit?" He was embarrassed. I said, "Well, I just want to look. I didn't want to show that I was, afraid of Hell Week, but this is not my deal. This is the '60s. This is I'm going to go live in an apartment." And so I went and did that. Uh, uh, I didn't have enough money like for a car or anything, but I got into motorcycles, and I got a Honda 90, which when I look back at it looks like one of these little electric bikes. And I remember riding the Honda 90 across the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge and feeling like, the tires were so narrow, you're going to fall through the gratings. And I loved it. And, uh, and, I took classes. I was a pre-med student, but I just loved going to, the protests, uh, uh, meeting a number of the Black Panther Party, uh, going on Telegraph Avenue. Uh, it was just really exciting, and I
I
wasn't a
love,
I
yeah,
wasn't a pot, but I liked pot.
it's funny. Yeah, I mean, I love San Francisco and the whole, I don't know, the romance of all that 60s stuff. What did you, what happened with the Black Panthers? We had just, 2 minutes.
Well, I just go to gathering. I didn't really know them well.
Hmm.
I think I went to somewhere. I don't know if it was Bobby Seale or uh, but what was interesting is that, the people who hung up on Telegraph Ave, a number of them were part of what it was, the Chicago Seven, the Chicago Eight, Jerry Rubin, uh, and so you'd run into them. I took one class taught by Tom Hayden.
Hmm.
Tom Hayden later married Jane Fonda, and uh, and so and I and then I my first deep relationship was someone I lived with in an apartment from a junior and senior year, and then uh, it had run its course, and so at the end of senior year, I've never gone into this detail. I hope it's not boring to you. So I'm reliving it. Uh, and so at the end of senior year, it was a good time to break up. And her parents lived in Long Beach, California, and mine were back in Boston. And and I didn't immediately get into medical school, so I was going to go to graduate school. And I made the mistake of going home and living with my parents. Good people, but still dysfunctional. And I got really lonely, and I started writing these love letters. And she stayed with her parents. And even though we were done with each other, by the end of the summer, we were madly in love with each other.
Hmm.
And I said, let's get married. That shows you how desperate I was. Not desperate, but lonely. And so I went to graduate school at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And I got her into the master's program in education. So she came out and we went out to Amherst. And that was an interesting time. Julius Irving was there that year.
Hmm.
He was just unbelievable basketball player. Natalie Cole was there.
Hmm.
A couple of years later, Bill Cosby went there, got his graduate degree.
Hmm.
And so we moved there, and I was a graduate student. But then I applied to medical school, and I got into Boston University, and uh, uh, which is something I decided to do. So I left graduate school and went to Boston University and started a medical school. Uh, and uh, and it's interesting because one of the things you do with trauma is you suppress it and repress it, and it comes out. And the way it came out with me, I was sarcastic as hell. I was
Hmm.
so cynical. I was so witty,
Hmm.
but it was all defense. Um, and I got depressed, and so I took a leave of absence. I was passing everything, and they allow you to take a leave of absence. Go figure yourself up. And I was confused and depressed, and so I did that. Um, and and my first life was pretty practical. When I dropped out, I think she thought he's a loser, and I didn't know that I was a loser. I just thought I was a loser in training because I was, and so I come back, and in 6 months I get really depressed,
Hmm.
and I'm somehow passing, and uh, I asked for another leave of absence, and what I didn't realize is that when you ask for leave of absence, the school loses matching funds and money. Your tuition doesn't cover. So I'm passing everything, and I met with the dean of the school who cares about money. I don't even remember meeting with him. Uh, and then I get a call from the dean of students who cares about students. So I think what happened is the dean of the school knew he was going to asked the school to kick me out, and he didn't want me going off the deep end.
Mm.
And so the dean of students calls me and says, I got a letter here from the main dean. Why don't you come and we'll read it together?
Mm.
And the letter said, I've met with Mr. Goulston. We talked about alternate careers, and I'm advising the promotions committee that he be asked to withdraw. Now, I was pretty broken. I was pretty bottomed out, which was sort of a miracle. Also, I didn't complain. I didn't say, they can't do that, I'm passing. I didn't whine. Because when I read that, and I said, what does it mean? He said, the dean of students said, you've been kicked out. And I think a miracle might have happened. And I'm not particularly spiritual religious. When he said that, it was, I folded over. It was like a gunshot wound. And, went, oh. And I started rubbing my cheekbones because I thought I was bleeding. I mean, I just kept looking at like, what is this? You know, because I'm not used to compassion or anything. And it was tears. And then he hit me with the trifecta of hope. And he said, you didn't mess up, but you are messed up. I mean, you're passing everything, but if you get unmessed up, I think this school would one day be glad they gave you a second chance. And I don't know why he thought that about me. And for 25 years, I was wondering, why did he think that about me? And what I realized, I just discovered it. I wrote, you know, during one of my leaves of absence, I wrote a poem that got published in a journal of geriatric psychiatry. And it was called Lament for the Old. And I won't read the whole thing, but I was talking about that when you're a doctor, you're trained to save lives, but really not value. You provide care, but you don't provide caring. And so I wrote this when I was, I'm 3 times the age of when I wrote this, but I must have sent it to him. And the final paragraph says, I then took the time to get to know some of these marvelous people 3 times my age, which I am now, who offered a wealth of experience that spanned hundreds of years. What was so obviously missing was someone to share the fullness of the past, to help relieve the loneliness of the future, and maybe someone to give a damn when they died. And I'm 3 times that age. So I think he saw this. And so here's the trifecta of hope. He said, you didn't mess up, but you are messed up. And the first leg of the trifecta, the 3-legged stool, was sort of unconditional belief in me. He said, but even if you don't get unmessed up, even if you don't become a doctor, even if you don't do anything the rest of your life, I'd be proud to know you. So I didn't have to perform. I could be my broken self with apparently some kind of compassion or goodness or something that I guess came out in the poem. So he had this unconditional positive regard for something in me as opposed to my performance. And then the second thing he said was, you have no idea how much the world needs what you have. And you're not going to know it till you're 35. So he saw a future for me that I didn't see. And I am sobbing, you know, because I mean, he's pummeling me with compassion. And here was the clincher, because I wouldn't look at him. And he points his finger at me, says, look at me. And I meekly look at him. And he says, you have to make it till you're 35. and you deserve to be on this planet, and you're going to let me help you. If he had said, if I can help you, give me a call, I probably wouldn't have called him. Maybe I would have dropped out, done something creative, or maybe I just wouldn't be here. But those three things, unconditional positive regard for something that I am, a future that I didn't see, and going to bat for me at his own expense, I just paid that forward for 35 years. So is this making any sense? I thank you for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's and so I took off and I went to a place called the Menninger Foundation, which was in Topeka, Kansas. It's now out of Houston. And it was one of the major psychiatric centers. And I drove there from Boston to Topeka, and I'm probably getting the year wrong, but it was the year of a big oil embargo, and you couldn't, all the gas stations were closed. I mean, and I remember driving across the George Washington Bridge from New York to New Jersey. I was the only car on the George Washington Bridge, and I slept in the back of the car. And I remember, I hope I can make, there's one gas station after State Line in New Jersey. I hope I can make it there. And then I go to Topeka, Kansas. And, part of my assignment is Topeka State Hospital. And I grew up in a suburb of Boston, and there's a lot of schizophrenic young adults there, young farm adults, young women. And back then they were pretty far gone. Some of them, I mean, it was like in some of the movies, some of them were really catatonic. They would just stand there all day, in the room. And so I was assigned a couple of them. And I remember reaching out to the psychiatrist and I said, is this legitimate? Because this is not like med school. And they said, no, this is a legitimate profession. And it's still not looked at that way because of all the stigma. I mean, we still have a lot. That's, I don't know how many years ago. And I remember he said, and you have a knack. I didn't think I had a knack for anything. He said, see, you can get through. I'll share one other anecdote because so I intensely got to know this. He must have been early 20s, young farm adult, and he was catatonic. And I would meet with him every day, and he didn't talk. And, and I did an extensive study of his past history. And then I had this crazy idea because I go see him in a consulting room. And I think part and parcel of state mental hospitals is they have the hardest linoleum floors in the world. Green linoleum. And I mention that because, I'm not getting through to him. And then I said to him, oh, I want to try something. And he was compliant. He was just like this. He said, I want to try something. He's going along with it. I said, I'm going to get behind you and you're going to fall and I'm going to catch you. And so I get behind him and he's like this. And I say, it's okay. And he falls. And he falls 6 inches and I catch him. Then I say, let's do it again. And he falls like 1.5 feet and I catch him. And it works well. And then in my mind, I said, it's kind of like the forgiveness exercise I told you. I said, oh, I've got to now have him do it to me.
Wow.
So I said to him, you're going to get behind me and catch me. He's like this. And I bring up the linoleum because there I am standing in front of him and he's like this. And I'm saying to myself, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to fall backwards. I'm going to crack my freaking skull on the linoleum. I'm going to die. And, but I had to play it out. Something inside me had to play it out. And I remember closing my eyes. I'm in front of them. I go, here it goes. And I fall back, and he lifts his arms up, and he won't let me fall 5 inches. And I look at him, and I see life in his eyes. Now, I can't say he fully recovered, but I saw a spark of life in his eyes. So my career has always been a little bit unconventional.
Okay,
Can I share one anecdote that kind of makes me crazy? So I finished training in psychiatry.
Mm-hmm.
A fellowship falls through, and so I figure, well, let me see. I'll go out there, see if my mentor, who's this big suicide, death and dying specialist, see if he'll refer me people. And he would do consultations to people that residents didn't want to see because they needed to be discharged, but they were, still pretty suicidal. But in order to get discharged, they had to be referred to someone. So I was a person he would refer to. And one of the things I also learned is that when I would be with suicidal patients and I'd look into their eyes, when I'd be checking boxes, following protocols, I began to see that their eyes were screaming at me, "You're checking boxes and I'm running out of time."
Hmm.
And because I didn't have to go into a fellowship and I didn't have to do all the research stuff, I threw away the boxes. And I just looked into where their eyes took me.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that just pushed me over the line was a woman I'll call Nancy. She had made 3 suicide attempts before I saw her. She had been in the hospital multiple times for several years and sometimes for months. You could be in that long. And so Dr. Schneidman referred her to me. And I was seeing her 2-3 times a week. And she wasn't catatonic, but she hardly said anything. And if you're me and I'm her, she'd look at me like this. Mm-hmm. And I used to moonlight back then. So once a month, I would go to a state hospital and cover for the doctors in Norwalk, California, Metropolitan State Hospital. And sometimes we're up 24 hours, sometimes longer. So you can get a little dissociative, when you're sleep deprived. Mm-hmm. So I remember it's a Monday morning and I haven't slept, and I see her and she comes in and I'm looking at her and she's like this. And suddenly all the color in the room turned to black and white. So I'm looking out in the room and it's black and white. And I'm feeling cold and I'm thinking, I'm having a stroke or a seizure. Now, she wouldn't look at me because she didn't look at me. And so I did a neurologic exam on myself. I'm a psychiatrist. I was trained in neurology a little bit. So there I am tapping my elbows like this, going like this, going like this. And it's not rude because she's like this. And then I had this crazy idea. I'm not having a stroke or seizure. I am seeing the world through her eyes and feeling what it feels like to her. Mm. And I leaned into it and I got pulled to the bone. And because I was sleep deprived, I blurted this out because I was sleep deprived. I said, "Nancy, I didn't know it was so bad. And I can't help you kill yourself. But if you do, I will still think well of you. I'll miss you, and maybe I'll understand why you had to get out of the pain." And I thought, I think I just gave her permission. This is not good. Don't write this in the medical record.
Mm-hmm.
And she looked at me. It was kind of like, that fellow in Topeka. She looked at me and she locked eyes with me, and I locked eyes with her. And I thought she was going to say, thank you for understanding. I'm overdue. Because she came sort of out of her trance. I said, what are you thinking? And she looked at me and she said, if you can really understand why I might have to kill myself to get out of my pain, maybe I won't have to. And then she smiled. Color came back, the warmth came back, and I locked onto her eyes. And I said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm not going to give you treatments that have been tried that didn't really work, unless you say maybe we should try such and such. Would that be okay? And we're locking eyes, and she's looking at me like, keep talking, I'm intrigued. And I said, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to find you wherever you are. And I'm going to keep you company there as long as it takes, because I don't want you to be alone there anymore. Would that be okay? And just like I turned a corner with the dean of students, she turned a corner. And then, and I'm retired now, but and my approach to suicide is very simple. And the problem is the barriers to entry are huge because everybody has so much intellectual property, and we've got these programs. And to me, people who are suicidal grab on to death because they can't make the hurt go away. And it's intolerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I make a distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is pain. We can live with a fair amount of pain. Suffering is feeling utterly alone in pain. And suffering we can't live with becomes pain we can when we don't feel alone in it. And so, when I would see suicidal patients and I dive into their eyes instead of checking boxes, all I'd want to do is lessen the hurt to where they let go of the death, to where they grab on to the surgical empathy. And what that got down to is I realized what happened is I totally immersed them in oxytocin. I just bathe them in oxytocin. It's like a placenta connecting to an infant.
Mm-hmm.
And what people may not know is oxytocin directly counteracts high cortisol. It's good to meditate. It's good to do yoga, but that doesn't necessarily have oxytocin in it. But when you immerse someone in high oxytocin where they feel felt, which is different than figured out and treated, as the oxytocin goes up, the cortisol goes down, the amygdala hijack that has been operating to fight, flight, or kill yourself to get out of the pain, the amygdala hijack settles down. And the blood flow, which has been shunted to their lower brain from the amygdala hijack, starts to go up to their upper brain, and they can begin to think. So when you can connect to people so they feel felt, and it doesn't always work, but when it does, they start to be able to think, and hope comes in. So lessen the intolerable amount of pain by connecting with them. Their mind starts to relax. They start to be able to think, and being able to think, it's not too far before they begin to think of options.
Hmm.
And that coincides with hope.
Hmm. Can I ask? So, there are two lessons that I've learned from you over the years that have been very meaningful to me and that I think connect to the feeling felt. Okay. One of them is watching you as you natively, intuitively translate between your, one person and another, putting the language to what someone is trying to say to another person. And you do it in a deep, a really almost like a channeled kind of way. And in one of the conversations that we had about it, and we were talking about apologies and we were talking about dealing with kind of narcissists and so forth. And you talked about the distinction between regret and remorse. And this also feels like it plugs into this conversation. And I'm wondering if you could share kind of how you learned these things and then also explain them.
Um, so I've done a bunch of things. You listed some of them. In the 1980s, I was the world's authority on helping divorced couples get back together again.
Hmm.
They found me. I really haven't marketed anything. I wrote this book. It's done very well. There's very little marketing. It seems to be an evergreen book, and people found me. Uh, and so people would get back together again, and I was in the New York Times. I was on Oprah. I was on Donahue. That's dating me. I was in the LA Times. But I was, also focused on hostage negotiation training and suicide prevention. So that could have been a good cottage industry. I mean, I don't have the time left in my life, but that could still do well. But what I realized is, uh, and they were successful because I vetted them. So if someone reached out to me because they heard some other couple got back together again, I said, uh, so what have you learned? And if there's one temptation in you to blame the other person, it's a non-starter. You got to be contrite on steroids. And you got to own up to how you messed things up, both of you, or else I won't see you. I don't want to waste your money and my time. So I came up with it. So here's something else that I hope is practical. I hope some of your viewers and listeners have been able to extract something from these long stories. So I came up with an airtight formula. And I'd welcome people saying, well, I'd revise it this way. And this is how you earn back trust after you have destroyed it. Through betrayal, through affairs, through spending all the family money on gambling or whatever. And I came up with this airtight formula, and you can find any of these things. If you look these things up, you'll find. And I came up with the 4 H's and the 4 R's. And when you've betrayed someone, when you've cheated on them, when you spent all the money, on drugs and alcohol and gambling, you triggered 4 H's in the other person: hurt, hate, hesitation to trust you again, and holding on to a grudge. You hurt them. They hate you because you took something away that they thought was there. They're hesitant to trust you again because they think you'll do it again. And they're holding on to a grudge.
Mm-hmm. And
And the 4 H's seamlessly fit with the 4 R's. So hurt needs remorse. And the difference between remorse and regret is, okay, I did it. Can you get off my back? I learned my lesson. I'm not going to do it again. Okay. So, can you just stop it already? So that's regret. Remorse is you look into the eyes of that person. And if you're a man looking into the eyes of that woman, you look into the eyes of that woman that you fell in love with, who adored you once, who you just ripped to shreds. And you say, look at me. And they're not going to want to look at you because they don't trust you. And you say to them, I broke something in you. I broke something real bad in you. And I was wrong. And I don't know if it can be fixed, but I'm going to do everything I can to fix it. That's remorse.
Mm.
The second, they hate you. The second R is restitution. And that may be something that you took a chunk out of them, they're going to take a chunk out of you. Maybe it's a big fat check that's not just pocket change to you because you're so wealthy. Emotionally, a better fit is you let them vent everything they have to vent. Don't let them physically beat you up. But one of the things they may have to vent, and I remember seeing a woman who said this. Now, she didn't get back together again. So I was seeing her after she's divorced, and she said, my husband convinced me that I was crazy with my suspicion. And because I wanted to believe him, maybe because I was afraid of, leaving or whatever, I sold out myself because he convinced me I was crazy. I am never selling out myself again. Ever. And so restitution is you let that person vent as much as they need to. And it's not going to be a one-off. And they're going to get flashbacks. And they're going to drive down the road and, oh, that's the place, that's the hotel you used to stay at with so-and-so. The third H is they're hesitant to trust you, and that needs the third R, rehabilitation. They need to see that you have fixed what was really fucked up in you so that you deal with conflict differently besides acting out on it. Besides saying, just leave me alone, I'm fine, and then going out getting drunk, spending money, having an affair. But what they have to see with the rehabilitation is you have to like the new skill that you learned. Because again, if you just pay lip service and say, okay, I'm going to AA already, okay? I go to meetings, okay? Isn't that enough? They're not going to believe it because they just feel it's insincere. You're just doing it to get them off your back. But it is possible to develop these things. And what I found from some couples, is the person who was trying to earn back trust would look at me and say, I remember one guy said, if I knew it was so easy, I wouldn't have made it so difficult. Just how to deal with things. And, and I have a book, by the way, called Talking to Crazy, How to Deal with the Irrational and Impossible People in Your Life. It's not about mental health or anything. It's about people who drive you crazy and how to basically disarm them with a certain kind of empathy. And so after you've gotten them to overcome their hesitation to trust you because you've rehabilitated yourself, the fourth H is they're still holding on to a grudge. Well, I don't know if I know it happened and you've done that, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Uh, so the fourth R is after you've internalized the first three into your personality: remorse, restitution, rehabilitation. You can't change the past. After you do that, you have earned the right to request forgiveness. Don't expect them to forget.
Mm.
And when I would see couples, sometimes, they'd follow these steps, and the person who had been hurt said, I don't know that I can forgive. To which I would say, which of your parents did you learn that from? What?
Mm.
Yeah. This is not something you just picked up. Which one of your parents was unforgiving? Well, that was my mom. That was my dad. Yeah. Yeah. Ever be the target of that unforgivingness? Yeah. Yeah. What did that feel like? Oh, it was awful. Or did you ever see your mother or father be the target of it? From, oh, yeah, it was awful. They shouldn't have stayed together. Well, knowing what it feels like to be the target of someone who's unforgiving, are you sure you want to stick with that? So you following me?
Yeah, that's emotional Jedi right there.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I get them to talk about all the trauma at being,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
being, that unforgiving parent, and oh, what it did to their self-worth, what it did to cause them to act out all through their teens. So,
Yeah, Mark, listen, what life experience led you to train hostage negotiators? What was going on in your life where some door opened up and that was what was on the other side?
well, so I haven't bored you with my stories because I got a good one. You're gonna like this one. So when my kids were in middle school, I used to do presentations to the parents. And one of the presentations was uh, how to keep your kids safe. And the co-presenter, great guy, worked for the FBI. And he went first. And he went through all the things. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to make sure of, and this whatever. Maybe I should have just quit medical school and just because I have a flair for being melodramatic. So picture this: these are private school, overprotective helicopter parents, and so it's my turn. And the title of my talk is "It's My Party, and I'll Die If I Want to."
Mm.
And I played their teenage kid who they overprotected, going to a party, and they're not going to call the parents. They're not going to find out if there was drugs or alcohol. And so I just played that teenager, saying, I got a 4.5 and no life, and you've ruined my freaking life, and blah, 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 blah. And then I'd step out of character and I'd say, now you have to protect your kid. Your kid hasn't gone to parties, they don't have the best judgment. So, you got to talk them out of it. And just like I did with the hostage negotiation training, they couldn't talk me, but that came later, the hostage negotiation training. But anyway, they couldn't talk me out of it. And I always have some sort of a kind of a gotcha phrase. And so, and I like to lull the audience into thinking they've won. Um, if we have time, I can tell you I did a talk with the managing partners globally at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. But that was a whole other thing about uh, uh, how to talk someone into leaving their financial advisor for Goldman Sachs, and I ripped them a new one too. But what
We
I
didn't
happened?
we didn't mention this, by the way, so far in this conversation, but Mark is actually coach, advisor, strategic to many of the top CEOs and leaders in the whole world. And so he does that like on the side. It's very hush hush though.
Yeah. So what happened is I lull them into a false sense of uh, comfort, and I say, "You really want what's best for me, don't you?" And the parents go, "Uh-huh." And everything you do is for my own welfare, isn't it? They go, "Uh-huh." And then I looked at them and I said, "So my reward is if I live my life and do everything that all of you are asking me?" And they're going, "Uh-huh." That means I get to grow up and be as fucking happy as you are.
Oh God.
Oh, can I tell you another thing? When I did this with this is a long thing. So this is probably my one of my best stories. Like the hell with the corporations. You can bring me in if you're curious. One of my favorite. So I learned how to channel, do a devil's advocate thing. So I did a presentation at Terminal Island Federal Penitentiary, and the chaplains brought me in.
How old are you at this point? Where are you in your life? And how'd you get in there?
I think no, it was definitely after the FBI training. So I think I must have had a connection or something like that. So I reached out to them. I don't know how the introduction was, and I said, uh, what are you doing with what they call them now as returning citizens? Do you have a program for returning citizens to rebuild the trust in their family? Because when they go out, they're going to go out and they're going to come back. And I said, it's something I'd like to try. And so I go to Terminal Island Prison, and the chaplain brings me in. All these big, tough, burly, African American, mostly Hispanic, some whites, but big. They're weightlifters. And so they walk in from the yard. They all have a copy of the Bible. It's the chaplain's gig. And my role play is how to rebuild trust in the family that you're going back to. And a lot of these things, I didn't do it with the parents, but I did it with when I role played in the hostage negotiation training. So in this one, I take off my little, nice professory sport jacket, and I have a black T-shirt on, and I just grease my hair back. And then I say to them, and so I become this other person. And I said, I'm your younger brother. You're getting out of prison. When you get out of prison, you love our family, you fucking move. Mom believes in Jesus and she'll give you a second, third chance. But I know that all you're ever going to be is a lying sack of shit loser. So you care about our family? Don't come home. And if you say I should respect you because I'm your younger brother, I've been lifting weights too. And I'll put your head through the fucking wall. So how do you like that welcome home, bro? And then I got right up to them, 6 inches away from them. And no matter what they did, I just damned it back, and they started getting agitated. And finally, it reaches a point where they say to the chaplain, "Get this guy away from me," because I'm channeling on steroids there. And I say, "This is what you need to say, and you have to mean it. And if you could say this to your family and me, I'll give you a second chance. When you go home, you need to meet with each person individually, and then you meet with all of them together. And what you say to them is, I know I have humiliated this family. I know the fact that you're related to me has been, you've all carried around with you through your lives. I know you, my siblings, uh, it's uh, uh, it's hurt you, uh, and uh, and I know that you're deeply, deeply ashamed and humiliated by me. And then you're going to look at each of them in the eye, kind of like I did with Nancy. And I practice this with them. And you're going to look me in the eye, your younger brother, and say, and I know all of that. And I know that you hate that I'm related to you. But in the part of you that is most ashamed of me and hates me, and that part of you, and you're looking into their eyes. So I taught them this. One day you'll be proud. And you got to look at them, because what you're going to do otherwise without the training is you're going to go home, you're going to look away because you're ashamed. And when you look away, they're going to think you're plotting your next crime. And so they don't know that you're looking away because you're ashamed. So they need to know, talk about remorse. They need to know this. And I can remember I did one of the trainings. There was one of the they don't use the word, I forget the current word. It's not inmate, but they went back to the yard. And I remember as they're leaving the room, there was one fellow, he was about 6'7". He had hands the size of catcher's mitts. And he took my hand in his two hands and he looked at me and he said, I didn't follow a lot of what you said, but I'm going to think about it. Thank you for coming here. You know, I should list. I've had tons of stories. I spoke to 11 to 17-year-old young murderers at juvenile hall, you know, about the power of keeping a journal so that they don't take away your thoughts. The place I actually started it, there's a video of this. So I had a mentor at UCLA who sent me all these suicidal referrals, and he had a class called Death and Suicide for 20 years. It was a waiting list to get into it. So we had all these guest lecturers, coroners, and I was one of the guest lecturers, and I was the highest rated. And there's a video of this. If you look up, I'm going to kill myself. I think that's what it's called. You'll see me in the 90s at UCLA. And what would happen is there'd be all these undergraduates, and I'd get in front of them, and then I'd say, I'm not Dr. Goulston anymore. I'm Jack. And I'm not like any of you. I'm a loser. And I'm taking off my sport jacket and I have, like a t-shirt on. And I basically said, basically, that I was at my wit's end. And talked me out of it because I'm done. And then I hold up a manila envelope and I drop a bunch of pills out of it. And I say, oh, I can't do anything right. I'll get constipated if I eat this stuff. And then I let go of my hand and a gun comes out of the manila envelope and I cock it. And I hold it to my head. And I said, talk me out of it. It's okay. Even if you don't, you can still get an A in the course. and this is on the video. And so no matter what they do, because what I do is I corner them and then I say, this is what you could have said to me. This is what you could have asked me. It was kind of fun at Goldman Sachs. This is what you could have said to me so that I would jump ship from my current financial advisor to you.
Mm.
but you didn't say it. So I said this to these students at UCLA. And so what happens is, no matter what they say, it's not working. And this is in the video. So one of the students comes up, and when I channel this, and I once did this for you in MetaMind, I played Steve Jobs coming back from the dead. Remember that one? I mean, I did. And so what happened here? Someone comes up, and he's saying, Jack, I know you really need a hug. I know how alone you feel, and it was kind of like with the parents I was talking to. I was saying, oh, keep talking. This is so good. And he comes up and he said, can I give you a hug? And I say, yeah, but if one part of you is doing this, the grandstand, I'm going to rip your fucking throat out. But come up. So he comes up, and I'd put the gun down on the table, and he grabs the gun, and everyone applauds. But I'll tell you, when I do this, and not to be outdone, I said, good for you. And I said, some of us people who are crazy still have hobbies. I collect guns, and that's my smallest one. I didn't want to come into I'm not so crazy to come into, the university with a gun. So anyway, I mean, that's enough. I mean, we're taking a lot of time, and I hope I've been entertaining and informative, and we haven't even talked about kind of what I'm facing. So
I would really love for you to touch for a second. A few years ago we talked, and you told me, you said, I've been getting called to the bedside of very wealthy people who are dying. And you talked to me about some of the things that they were saying. And it really, something about those conversations were really very powerful. You're so present through the challenging things. And then I've been talking to you lately a little bit about some of the things you're going through right now that you are, well, I don't want to spoil the story, but bravely heading through. What have you learned here?
okay, so I, look, I did a bunch of things, but I was also a death and dying specialist, and
Mm-hmm.
you learn a lot. So it wasn't just suicidal patients. Dr. Schneidman would refer me to do house calls to dying patients, who, I tried to help them find peace with their lives. And I got a few stories that are worth sharing. So thank you for letting me go. There was one who was just very popular in the public eye, uh, uh, powerful, rich, kind of beloved in the public eye, but had multiple marriages and kids on trust funds and things like that. And I went to visit him, and some of these people, I guess most of the people I coach, they like that I can be pretty straight with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, you look like crap, and I don't think it's because you're dying. You've been dying as long as I know you. What's going on? And again, I'm not being arrogant. They just like that instead of being afraid. And he said, I don't think I've ever done anything important in my life. I said, what? And then I listed a bunch of the things, huge things. And I said, so that doesn't matter? He said, no, not now. And then he looked at me, he said, don't con a con man, especially when he's dying. I have all the love that money can buy.
Mm.
And everything I thought was important isn't. And everything I thought wasn't important is. And I've run out of time to fix it. And what he was referring to is he wasn't close to another human being, and he didn't let anyone really get close to him. He wasn't even close to himself. And all these things didn't matter.
Mm.
Here's another story, because I got a bunch of them. Here's one story. Uh, uh, so I was visiting this other person, and he was someone who won Grammys in several decades. And but he was also known for run-ins with the police, for drugs, getting arrested, and all of that sort of stuff. And this was a really, this was, and he gave me two insights, because, I'd visit him on different occasions, like, what's wrong today? Mm-hmm. And I said to him, I said, what was all that police stuff? What was all the drug stuff? And he said, I'm a prodigy, and I wasn't stupid enough to destroy my talent. But a lot of times when I did great things, other people would take credit for it. My mom, my manager, that's our little boy, blah, 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 blah. And he said, one of the reasons I did drugs is nobody wanted to take credit for that. Mm-hmm. And he said, everybody needs to own a piece of themselves. Mm-hmm. And then there was another thing. I mean, he was fascinating. And I said, so what's upsetting you today? He said, there were 5 times when the music in my mind matched the music that I composed and played. And knowing that it was possible, I tried to make it happen every time, and I failed except 5 times. And I said to him, you're an idiot. To know perfection at that level, you're flirting with God, although I'm sure God, might have, some different opinions about whether they want to flirt with you. But that level of perfection is unbelievable. Mm-hmm. So you took an ideal to aspire to, and you turned it into a standard to live by, and you were a real pain in the ass. Mm-hmm. Let it go. That was the day his Doberman pinscher attacked me and ripped up my sleeve off my sweater, but he didn't pierce the skin. So, like dad, like dog.
Mark, tell us what you're facing right now.
Well, when this posts, I will have had a bone marrow transplant because I have a condition that turns into acute myeloid leukemia. And I've become more optimistic lately because here's another insight. I've got the best doctor I've ever met in my life, 265 5-star patient reviews. He's a unicorn amongst unicorns. And my other advice to you, you got to have a good spouse. You got to have a good team member, because I have so much trust and confidence in him. That at the end of our first meeting, I think I'm a little bit humorous. I told him, I said, you have all these reviews, and I can see why. And I said, Doc, win, lose, or die, I'm good to go. And I think that's 50% of my peace of mind. And and you shouldn't settle for less as a business partner. And you have to live up to that standard too. Don't you be the lemon in your relationships. Because I'd actually met someone before him who was very bright, but really so condescending, I'd be afraid to ask him questions. And I think 50% of my peace of mind is that I got this great team.
Yeah.
And I'm applying a lot of the lessons I've learned from my whole life. And I have a series on YouTube called I'm Dying to Tell You, Dr. Mark. I think we're up to 65 episodes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
They're great little nuggets. They're absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, and you can learn lessons from them. So I will share. I mean, you're giving me a long leash here, but I'll share 3 of my favorites that I think will be relevant to you. The first episode is called Michelangelo Dying. Michelangelo saw an angel in the marble and carved to set it free. And so one of my first realizations when I got these diagnoses and treatments is I saw what was important in life inside everything that's unimportant. And I just carved away what was unimportant. Should have carved it away years ago. And you can do that. A second thing, if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to write this down. It's called Visionary Dying. So I did play Steve Jobs coming back from the dead. God, I got dead all around me here. But I played that at one of Eben's MetaMind conferences. And here are the 3 Ds if you're a founder or visionary. And Steve Jobs did them. The first D is define reality beyond what is possible or even imaginable. Geez, I think we could have personal computers in everybody's life if we can get them to stop typing and give them a mouse. Gee, maybe we can combine. It's an iPod. It's a telephone connecting device. It's an internet connector. These are not 3 devices. I give you the iPhone. So he defined reality way beyond what people thought were possible. Or maybe he just got it together at the right time. Elon Musk, I don't know if this is true. Someone said, you know, they have a lot of batteries in laptops that last long, and they're getting better. And this might be old folklore. He said, I think we can do that in cars. So define reality beyond what's imaginable. The second D is you declare your intention to make it so. Steve Jobs had a reality distortion field. So he could convince you we're going to make this so. The problem is he self-hypnotized himself about his pancreatic cancer. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't make that so. And the third D is decide strategy. Everything else after that is operations. And make sure you get a really good person to deal with operations, because a lot of visionaries really suck as managers. You know, because their vision is so clear. And so my visionary dying is I have a clear vision of what a good death is. Crystal clear. And Dr. Schneidman has an article, A Good Death. And if you look up A Good Death, Mark Goulston, you know, I feature that somewhere in one of my blogs. And I meet all the criteria except living till 90, kind of with your mental faculties intact. I'm 75. Look, I was looking at a year or 2, and it might be hopefully much better than that. But I'm not going to make 90. And so I have declared my intention. I'm going to make it so. And I've decided strategy. And the strategy is, as I said, get a great medical team. You know, get the people in your family to be so dedicated to you, you don't even know whether you deserve it. So I've got that. I do like to add a little bit of humor. Dr. Schneidman was a great thinker, but he summarized a good death. He said, and he got this from one of his mentors. He said, a good death is dying so as to be as little a pain in the ass to your family as possible. So I'm following that one as best.
Yeah, brilliant. By the way, when Mark and I talked a few days ago, um, he told me that the first thing that he's going to do in a week or whenever he starts this treatment is use a combination of radiation and chemotherapy. If you know anything about either of those, you know that they're pretty intense. They're going to do it together. They're going to use radiation and chemotherapy to kill all the marrow inside of his bones. That's step one. Then they're going to inject stem cells into him that he's getting donated by a family member. And they're going to cross their fingers and hope that this takes. And he's looking at 6 months of very, very, very challenging recovery. But his chances are pretty good. Okay, his chances are pretty good. And I mean, I rarely talk in my life to someone that's facing something like, I don't know if I've ever talked to someone that's facing something quite like that. And the good naturedness of it all. And I just said, I feel like it's important that you tell your story, Mark, and you share where you are and what you're going through and what you're doing. And he wanted to come here and do this. And so, Mark, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I wanted to end with something because, well, I'll just do it. So one of my episodes, and I'm dying to tell you, is the power of true vulnerability. So about, I don't know, 5-6 months ago, a lot of people reach out to me. Nobody's networked like Eben, but I like to make introductions. And usually I focus on the other person. I don't think I'm a saint. I'm just probably a part of me that's avoiding stuff. And so about 5 months ago, someone reaches out, and these are all men for some reason or other, because I think women maybe are more in touch with different feelings. And he said, so how you doing? And normally I would say, well, I'm fine. And, what's going on? What are you working on? Maybe I can help you. Maybe I can introduce you to people. And I said, oh, I got a couple issues. And you can tell, he's multitasking. I'm probably the seventh in, a stack of 10 calls he was going to make. And he says, oh, what's going on? And I don't know what took hold of me, but I looked into the camera and my eyes watered. And I said, I think I might be dying. And I looked at him. I got emotional. I got embarrassed. I apologized. I said, this is wrong. This is wrong. And he said, don't apologize. And I said, this is wrong. He said, Mark, this is a gift. And I said, how is it a gift? And he said, this is the most emotionally intimate conversation I've ever had. And I did it again, as I'm talking to people. Same thing. I got emotional, and I'm feeling that way with you, Eben, because I know we matter to you. And I apologize again. And the second person said, this is a gift. I'm envious of you.
Mm.
Said, why are you envious? He said, I don't want your illness. He said, the way you're so open right now, the way you're so real, the way you feel so safe to trust me, I have never felt that ever. And I see you as free. And then here's the other thing. And I think Eben may have already said, count me in. So a number of these people, I'm not asking anything. I've kind of stopped apologizing because it's sort of disingenuous now because everybody's saying don't apologize. But a number of people have been saying to me 24/7. And I say, what does that mean? And they say, you can call me 24/7. Now, these are people, if I came to them with a cockamamie business idea, they would say, oh, that's interesting, Mark. My plate's full. We're starting a new platform. They would ghost me.
Mm-hmm.
But they're the ones saying 24/7. And I've been trying to figure out why they're saying it. And I believe the reason they're saying it, yes, they feel a connection to me and they care about me. And I think they're saying 24/7 because they want more of this kind of conversation because they don't have it in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just sharing this with you. I think it's important to not come off as helpless, and I'm not against that. I mean, you're only human, but I think when I'm spontaneously just open, my guard is down. And I think when your guard is down, other people lower their guard. And we're talking about people who never lower their guard.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I just wanted to share that. So let me ask you, you want to be part of the club?
I am part of the club. And so, yes. And also, and we had a good cry the other day, actually, on the phone. And yeah. And I also want to say, it's also because we love you, Mark, and because you've been loving and caring and very selfless in your relationship with me and a bunch of people I don't even know, and just want to make sure you know that too. You always have a way of being both present and putting the other person first without um, doing it in a weird way, if that makes sense. Doing it in a way that maintains the kind of honor and connection of the relationship.
Well, something I've discovered, which, I don't know how this would play to some of the audiences that you work with. I've discovered that one of the best things about giving with no strings attached is nobody can steal it from you.
Mm.
And I'll tell you, it builds goodwill. I'm on the board of advisors of a bunch of companies, and they say, if this makes money, you're going to get some. I say, I'm downsizing. I don't have a filing cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
Send it to me. I'll sign it. I'll scan it. I'll send it back, and you keep it. I'm ripping it up because my office is so cluttered. And but just do good.
Mm-hmm.
Just make a
Mm-hmm.
success of what you're doing. And that's all. And and you don't have to give me anything. I mean, if you're inclined to do it, and I'm not around, figure out a way to, get it to my family. Uh, Here's an interesting thing. There's a number of people who are saying we're building a legacy to you. So they've created a Mark Goulston bot, and it's pretty good. And I said we have to work on the empathy part of it because,
It can never be like you, Mark. I'm sorry.
well,
We might be able to simulate it. It might be a little artificial, Mark, or something, but there's only one original, my friend.
we're getting close, Eben. So we'll
Okay,
talk.
all right, all right, all
No,
right.
no,
I
no,
know
because
AI is a big
it's
deal.
uh,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, anyway. I I love you too.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for talking to me today. Thank you for sharing.